Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Donohue at Lindenwood University. Here I teach saxophone, some of the jazz courses, jazz combos, and music technology and music production areas. Today I'd like to take a couple minutes, talk to you a little bit about some improvisation methods that I've kind of pulled together over the years that I think are really helpful to getting people to start improvising, but also can change your perspective for more advanced improvisers too, and make things a little bit more creative. So let's get started with this. I'm calling this free methods for developing creative solos for all improvisers. So these are generally viewed as less strict and focused on the theory aspects of typical jazz improvisation, rethinking approaches to improvisation, developing universally creative musicians in all musical genres. My view is that a lot of these values you can apply to almost any possible musical situation, whether it's a jazz band or a concert band or even a choir or any subset of people that want to play music together. So what is improvisation? Typically, especially like in a jazz band context, it's pretty clear what improvisation is. You're thinking about playing over chord changes and coming up with lines and using vocabulary that's been established for a number of years. And I think just shifting that a little bit, just for this conversation, is important so that we can really understand that there's more than one way to look at creating music spontaneously. So Tom Hall, who is a great saxophone player, has assembled a book about this subject that I find very inspiring. One of his key points is that the improvisation is more of a process. It's not a product. There's no final ultimate goal per se. It's a process that is developed with experience and time. It's more like thinking and remembering and feeling instead of making something. It's funny to think this maybe that all humans are improvisers. We do everything that we do every single day is some kind of improvisation where we're making really, really small decisions about, what we want to eat for dinner and how we maybe can make that. And we improvise how to do a lot of those things all the time. When we learn this view of improvisation, it'll greatly improve our musical output when we expand our knowledge and experience with time. So the thinking is that if we look at improvisation not only as a sort of a linear expression of harmony, of chord changes, and we look at it more like a creative process, it will influence and affect your ability to improvise over chord changes greatly. A number of years ago, I kind of got into free improvisation and free music by accident. It's sort of a long story. I won't go into it now, but it kind of opened my eyes to a lot of this music, and it changed my perspective a lot, especially when I go and I play a jazz standard like Autumn Leaves or Stella by Starlight or something like that. It's completely changed my view about how to approach a solo, and not just thinking about the appropriate scales for chords and things like that, which can be a lot. Free improvisation prepares students for better experiences when learning to play more conventionally structured jazz, which is kind of like what I just said. It sets a stronger foundation for learning all of the other more technical improvisational tools later on down the road. So why is it so hard? Why is improvising so difficult? It's difficult to learn because a lot of times young musicians are still learning their instrument, just making sounds, moving around on their instrument. It seems like, why would we make it more complicated by introducing the idea of improvisation when they barely can play their instruments in some situations? And it feels overwhelming in slightly more advanced situations where, okay, maybe we could teach theory and scales in the kind of the typical canon and conventional vocabulary for jazz improvisation. But that also seems like an enormous amount of work with not necessarily a ton of time to do that. So there's also the really common fear of thinking that you're not doing it the right way, and there's a right way and a wrong way. And one of my views is that this kind of thinking about free improvisation kind of eliminates that right and wrong way sort of view, and can open that door to more creative playing right out of the gate when students are young. And also there's a constant risk of rejection, like, I'm not good at this, I can't do this, and I won't ever be good at it kind of thing. It's it's innate. I can improvise or I can't. I'm born with it or I'm not. And that's just ridiculous. So again, that's sort of one of my goals in talking about this today, is to kind of get some people to think a little differently about how they've been improvising or trying to improvise up to this point, and maybe get some people that thought improvising was not for them into it a little bit more. Sometimes teaching can also be difficult because maybe you don't really think of improvisation as being part of what you do as a teacher. Maybe with a concert band or a choir or something like that, you don't think about improvisation as being tied to the music that you work on in those groups. In jazz bands, it's a little more common, obviously. But so maybe it's an exposure situation in some cases. And in some cases, you also may not have a limited knowledge on improvisation techniques and approaches, so it's not something that you actively teach. So I'm hoping for those individuals, you might feel like this is a good place to start. And then always there's this feeling of there's not enough time when you've got together with your students and you're like, we've got to get these songs worked out and with these pieces worked out and build some of the basic fundamentals of musicianship. There may not be time for this. Again, my view is that if we use these improvisational methods to build the musicianship too, in addition to, I think it sets the student off on an even better trajectory going down the road. So let's start the conversation about what free is. It's not easy to describe this music because there's such a long history of freely improvised music from all over the globe. So it's obviously I'm not doing it justice here in the short time we have to explain this, but what I want to get across here is that free improvisation or free music isn't maybe as unstructured as you may think, and creating some of these structures can bring a lot of clarity to how to improvise a little differently. So again, I think that these ideas can be used in any kind of instrumental group or vocal group even. I'm not a vocalist. I'm not an expert in that area, but in some of the brief research I did on it, I found a handful of situations where choirs do this kind of free improvisation from time to time, and it's really quite interesting how they approach it, because it's obviously a fundamentally different approach than you would see with an instrumental ensemble. But it's all the same kinds of ideas. It's just that the instrument itself is different, right? The voice. So especially groups that you see as maybe not being a typical instrumentation, viola, drums set together, that's kind of unusual, or harmonica and organ. There's church organ. I mean, there's like so many different things you could think of, and I think when kids are learning, it may be proposed to them that these are the types of instruments that go together, and these ones don't. So this is an interesting way to connect there. When I was in college, I did a performance with an accordion and a electric cellist, and I never in a million years thought that those instruments would ever be in my sphere of playing. And when I got involved in that group and played the music that they were working on, I was just sort of floored at the possibilities sonically that were there that I didn't know were there. So this could also open those doors. Sometimes this music is looked at as random or unstructured. It doesn't seem like there's the same typical rhythmic, harmonic, melodic structures that we would typically see in most Western music. And that's what I also want to show you, is that there is ways of structuring this music that makes it easy to understand, even for young students. And also, I think when you listen to this kind of music, you start to uncover the structures once you see maybe a little bit about how they're put together. And these are, again, only some of the ways to do it, because there's almost infinite possibilities, right? So historically, a lot of this music, especially teaching of this music in jazz education, has kind of been viewed as not serious, because it seemed as it wasn't as rigorous academically or even musically as the more common views of chord scale and harmonic analysis, and deep study of the jazz master's vocabulary, and incorporating all of those things, combining all of those things into a jazz solo. And it's too bad, because I feel like had I learned about these views on improvisation earlier on, I think I would be in a slightly different place than I am now. I'm glad I have, like I said, relatively recently, discovered some of these things, and it's kind of revived my view of making a music. So to me, I think it's an important thing to try to at least expose students at all ages to these ideas, and that they are serious ideas, and they are interesting ideas, and they are fun ideas too. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that. So structure can be organized by textures, sometimes just ideas or words like clouds, like play clouds. I mean, it sounds maybe a little silly at first, but I'm going to put it in some context for you. And of course, you could use things like visualizations, pictures, or imagining things that can inspire some musical activity. So one question is, how do we do this? How do we learn to do these? Take these improvisational approaches and apply them in actual musical contexts. So I love this quote by Cecil Taylor: "The inexperience of the players is a virtue rather than a drawback. There are fewer things to unlearn." We have someone in the band who's been playing only 7 months. I confront him with the possibilities around the one note he can play with ease, and have him see how that one note relates to a living musical structure. So again, this to me is a view that it doesn't matter how well you play or how experienced you are as a musician. This can be a great jumping off point if you can just make a noise, a sound on your instrument. So the first sort of way to structure some of this music is maybe text-based. So a narrative or an explanation or instructions on what players could do in step-by-step approaches, talking about the textures musically, loud, soft, thick, thin, light, heavy, fast, slow, relaxed. These can be viewed as musical textures. Different kinds of sounds that you can create: short sounds, long sounds, aggressive sounds, relaxed sounds. That kind of approach to describing not just notes coming out of instruments, like play an F It can be a lot more broad than that. Grooves is as it states, a way of putting together free music with some sort of rhythmic consistency, an underlying beat or pulse. Awareness is simply being sensitive to what's happening with the sounds that you make and the sounds that others make and how they combine. And I think that awareness issue is something that a lot of music educators really want to try to impart into their students early on, because so often you get a player that can really start to play their instrument pretty well, but the thing that they don't seem to understand how to do is to listen to others really effectively. And this awareness, when you don't have music in front of you, and you're thinking more about how this music feels and how what you're doing is affecting others and vice versa, can really improve awareness. Silence, we would normally just call it rests, but why wouldn't silence be a part of describing this music too? Melody, accompaniment, these are more of like the typical way we think about putting music together. What if, you had a piano and a clarinet, and the pianist started playing a variety of chords and notes that went together in their view, and that the melody was sort of made up. So there's like texture of melody and accompaniment in that example. And then we can keep going down this list of different ways to describe with words what to do. This quote from Tom Hall helps us a little bit, I think, too. Making a commitment to tell the truth, to show ourselves freely, is at once liberating and frightening. There are few places in the world where we have permission to do this without reservation and without judgment. There are even fewer places where we are able to do this in the company of others. Exploring free improvisation together gives us a safe place to totally and freely be ourselves and to creatively interact with others doing the same. I think that really encapsulates how I feel about playing this music and how I've seen it help students grow and open up musically very, very quickly. So I want to shift maybe away from the text view a little bit more to more of a visually based structure. So like using graphical or pictures or pictorial ways of generating musical sounds together. Visualizations like think of a tree. How would it make you play that music, that instrument, that music? What does the sound of a tree sound like? What is playing an emotion? Even if you don't feel that emotion right at the moment, it's like play happy, play sad, play angry. That the kind of approach can make a really direct connection between your feeling and your music. And in especially in jazz, we talk about things like feeling all the time, like feeling the groove, feeling the harmony, feeling it while you are soloing, while you're improvising. But we never really talk about what that means, and I think this is a good way of thinking about that and what that means. And this is a way to actually teach that and experience that as a student rather than just saying it and, I guess, figuring it out as we go. So here's some exercises I've put together. These are, again, just a few of the ways that you can structure this music. So these are some of the kind of ground rules in a way to kind of get started. The idea of the exercises is it really just creates boundaries to play within. So you're setting the ground rules, you're setting the way with which you can create something, just like you would if you were saying, if it's the 4 chord in C major, you've got to play the F Lydian scale. That's the same kind of boundaries, but far less technical. It takes some practice, discipline to learn to stay within the boundaries. It's very easy when you don't have strict instructions that it may be easier for you to kind of just give up and go wherever it's taking you. And that can be an important thing to explore for sure. That's kind of the definition of free, isn't it? But I think the point of the exercises too is to practice staying within the boundaries so that you can control staying within and then leaving the boundaries and exploring. And so important to think that there isn't a right way to do this or a correct way to do this. It's not about right or wrong, or is it good or bad. You don't want to create any situation where there's a judgment about quality at all, because it's not about quality. It's about making. It's just about making sounds together in communicating musically. It gives the mind something to focus on, because if you don't have something to focus on when you're trying to be free about the improvisational approach, you get a little lost. What am I trying to do right now? Am I trying to play busy? Am I trying to play simple? Am I trying to make room for other people? You're kind of asking questions, which you definitely want to do from time to time. But this way, it gives you a singular thing to focus on from moment to moment in these early exercises. It creates a language that we can then communicate with about this music too. It sets sort of like I said earlier, the ground rules, and we can communicate verbally a lot more flexibly after we've done a handful of these exercises. It doesn't matter how many people, the instruments, or what level you are at. None of that makes any difference. And the bottom line is this should be fun. It's fun, very fun. It should be serious, because if with seriousness comes a focus about the effective communication musically. But at the bottom line, it should be fun. So here's one example from Tom Hall's guide. And the idea is just one sound. Everyone in the group plays one sound in sequence. So however many people you have in the group, you just play a sound. It could be one note. It could be a note that is moving in like it's being bent, or you could even take this a little step further and make it like a very, very, very short combination of notes, like 2, maybe 3 notes super fast. That could be a sound. The point is that you just play that one sound, and you kind of establish what that sound is for each person in the group. No judgments, just play the way you feel, see how you feel about what it is that you played, and just stick with it. Again, there's many times you can do these exercises and learn from the process. So the first time you do it, it's going to be a little strange for sure. It's not important what you're feeling at the moment. It's just be aware of what you're feeling, and then play it. It's not important if you're scared or you're happy or you're excited. None of that really matters. What matters is that you just acknowledge that, and then you play, wherever you are at that moment in time. And then you all play those sounds together. That's it. That's the whole idea. Once everybody has got their sound, you play it together. Maybe somebody can cue that sound together. Now you have a sonic representation of that moment in time and everybody's feeling. It's sort of an interesting way of thinking of it to me. This is a very simple exercise, of course, and they're very short exercises, these ones. This is a similar idea, but this time use a pulse, some sort of consistent beat, either directed or maybe with a drum or a drum set, or even with a metronome if you wanted to do that. And then so in a circular pattern, everybody makes their sound one at a time, and they keep going in that circular pattern until you've decided, I want to change my sound a little bit, I want to change it a lot, I don't want to change it at all. And over time, it will evolve. And you'll be really surprised how interesting it can sound after a minute or 2 or 3 minutes of letting these decisions being made affect all the other sounds that are being made. You want to listen to how those sounds come together and make a phrase musically, and then make your decisions based off of that. Like, this is an interesting sounding phrase. I hear sort of a high note coming in here now, so I'm going to change my sound to that high note. And you're adding to that phrase kind of mentality of language and making solos or making improvisations. Again, it's not important that the sounds stop before the next one starts. So you could have sounds that kind of overlap. So maybe your sound is like a forte piano, so loud and then soft, and then maybe it just fizzles out. And while that one's fizzling out, the next one starts. There's no reason that can't happen too. It doesn't only have to be just like everybody play a quarter note or something. It can be a little bit more creative than that. So those are the first couple text ones. This next one takes it a step further. So this is the groove idea. Now, just like the last one, there's a pulse. There's a pattern of time. And that pattern allows us to build some kind of groove with various musical devices, melody-type sounds, bass-like sounds, rhythmic sounds, all within that consistent beat. So someone starts to play a short pattern. That's the difference here, is that the pattern has to be cyclical. You have to be able to repeat it over and over and over again. So, if a wind instrument starts, they might want to play like a short, combination of eighth notes and quarter notes, or something like that. You can count this off. It can be a given tempo already, or the first person can set the tempo. Either way, it works. Then after that's established and it's clear that what's being repeated is actually happening, the second player comes in and adds sort of a complementary part. You want to let that settle before you add any other parts. And this is a big group. It can be quite tricky to do this because it's going to sound too busy. So one of the ways to kind of combat that is to literally play half as many notes and twice as much silence. So you've got the idea musically in your head, but now just play it like half as fast in a way. So if you're playing lots of quarter notes, think of them as now either half notes or whole notes or something, and then leave extended gaps in those patterns. You can also choose to play with somebody else. You hear some sort of rhythmic pattern emerging in the group as you keep adding parts. There's no reason you can't add to that and play something that is identical or very similar to that. It doesn't have to be all different all the time. Try limiting how many notes you play or things you hit. So like maybe if you want to add another layer of sort of constraint to find the creativity within fewer options, because you might feel like you just have too many things you can imagine doing. Say, I'm only going to play a G and a C. That's all I'm going to play. Those two notes only. And you'll be surprised how many creative things you can come up with when you can only play two notes. Or if you're a drummer and you're sitting at a drum set, your instinct maybe is to hit the drums or hit the cymbals. What if you do something else, like hit the side of the drum, and that's the only thing you can do, right? What if it's the kick drum pedal, and when you move it before the beater hits the head of the drum, it makes a squeaking sound? What if that becomes part of the groove? So you can be much more creative sometimes by limiting how many options you have. And the last sort of text-based one I want to show you is the idea of mirroring. It's pretty obvious. One player starts and the second player just mimics them or mirrors exactly what they're doing as close as they can. At some point in this process, it's clear that somebody is leading and then someone is following them. We want to try to avoid that and kind of morph into both people or all people. If you're going to sort of have like a three-way or four-way mirroring or something like that, that no one is really leading. Except that you're all leading and no one's really following. So it's sort of all happening simultaneously. It's very tricky to do that because there's always going to be other things that drive your perspective of, am I leading? Am I following? Am I doing it right? And again, this is not important. But that's something to think about as you're going through an exercise like this one. Somebody could say at some point, yell out, switch, so you can kind of immediately move from one role to the next. Clearly someone has started, they're the leader, the other person's following. If you said switch, now you are switching roles and responsibilities there. After a few times of doing this, you might try to do it where you're not following and you're just both leading simultaneously. You don't want to do anything that's going to trick them or make them feel off-center musically. You're trying to almost read each other's minds as it's happening. Imagine like you're trying to mirror someone that's moving. If you move really quickly, they're not going to be able to mimic that fast enough. So you want to move in ways musically that make it easy to mirror, rhythmically, melodically, etc. So now I'll move on to sort of the graphical ways. This is the Forest Duos idea by Alan Chase from his work. And I found this really useful because it's very simple and it's visual. So it's a little bit more than just reading words. And it gives us some really cool jumping off points for making this kind of music again with structure. So I'm going to describe how this works, and this is just a template, so you can write in, a little bit more information and instructions and context based on the group that you're in and working on, and I'll show you a little bit more about this next. But the idea is that these boxes are the structural components of the form of the music. Form in music is a way we describe how it's structured. So again, why wouldn't we use that word to describe this music too? So the forest idea is a short, strictly repeated, not necessarily in time with others texture. So somebody starts playing a short, cyclical musical idea, right? And it has to be repeated really consistently. And it's natural then for the next person to enter and that they're going to want to play in time with that person, which is like the groove idea we talked about a minute ago. So when you're trying to be creative about this, try to think of ways to do it that are not necessarily in time or multiples of time. Like, you're hearing mostly quarter notes in the idea, so you play eighth notes, that kind of thing. Try to imagine a complementary sound to the first person that isn't necessarily in the same time. Quite difficult to do. But again, everybody has to play the short pattern and repeat it exactly the same way every single time. Once they're all together, you will hear them interact and cycle differently, especially if they're all different lengths. So if the first person plays clearly like a 2-bar loop, and they're kind of keeping this 2-bar loop happening, and then somebody else comes in at a slightly slower tempo, but it's really only about half as long, you're going to hear how different moments in the longer first bit are interacting with the shorter bit throughout the iterations or the cycles through the loop. And of course, the more you add to that, the more you'll hear that. So it may take some time for you to hear this whole forest in actual practice. So after moving from a forest, one idea is to move to a duet. So you simply identify two players that are going to work together and come up with a free duet where you can use these previous ideas. I mentioned like the mirroring idea or even like the groove idea or something to do these duets. Keep in mind that, in this example in the template, there's quite a few blocks here. And if any one of these blocks is more than a minute or two, this is a really long piece of music. So I guess one point to be made is that, don't just let them go, these ideas, until, they fall apart. let them go just long enough for them to be sounding complete. They have completely sounded their way through themselves. It can be 30 seconds, a minute, maybe two. So then then you can move into another forest, and then someone else could start that forest, and then a duet and another forest, a duet and a forest, and kind of keep going back and forth with these ideas. But you can take the idea a little bit further by using some of these other words and textures as a way of building the forests, perhaps. So the grove idea, which is a pun on groove, meaning a grove of trees, like a forest. But each one is, responsible for the whole. In this case, the whole groove or grove, like a forest, but strictly in time. So before the forest is it could be in time, but it shouldn't necessarily be in time, and you should consider ways of doing it not in time. The groove or the grove is strictly in time, like I mentioned before about improvising grooves. Stars, this short isolated sounds. Imagine what the night sky looks like and being able to see distant stars very separate from one another. These are short, isolated sounds, small groups of sounds, lots and lots and lots of silence, sometimes described as pointillistic if you're into visual art. Clouds, a sustained, longer overlapping sounds, space, literally silence, don't play anything. Storm, thunder, this is an easy one to get your head around, is like an eruption of sound, loud, thick textures. A drone, just a sustained sound. A lot of wind instruments aren't going to be able to do this very easily for very long, but there are a lot of instruments, like a bass guitar or, somebody that's bowing their instrument. Lots of different things can be sustained. You could think of even like a really quiet snare drum roll as a drone in a way, as long as it doesn't change in dynamics too much. It can kind of sound like a unchanging texture. So it doesn't have to be just a note. Or this chorale idea is an interesting one where you all start on a known pitch together. So let's say everybody starts on an E flat concert. So they're actually playing in octaves or unisons. And then you slowly begin moving in, imagine quarter notes or half notes or whole notes, all kind of moving in the same rhythmic durations. But you're waiting to change pitches until you see how that pitch fits with the others that are already established. And you're going to create harmonies in a chorale-like, like a Bach chorale-like texture, all spontaneously. So it's quite interesting, quite exciting, actually. So here's an example of one that Alan Chase put together. You can see here he's written names in, kind of indicating, in this case, when the people should enter in the forest, who should be playing in the duets, how the forests are put together. Like that third forest is like, this one's F major. Just everybody play the F major scale, something from F major. But that's it. Like that's your only choice. This idea that it can be spoken, that's kind of an interesting idea too. Like, let's just stop playing our instruments for a second and just say words and see how that kind of connects things musically and how we communicate. And again, this is just an idea of how to put this together. And these words like forest and clouds and stars, these can all be changed to words that are more meaningful to you. But the point really is just showing structure and different ways to structure. The coda, you can see he's using words like shimmering noise to create a different texture to end with. So. Okay, so what now? We're at the end here. you've maybe learned about some of the different ways of putting free music together, and you might be still wondering, how do I apply any of this to the music I'm playing in my jazz band or in any group that I'm in? And again, what I think is so important is that you try to do some of these things with no particular goal in mind. You just do them. You just have fun exploring these ideas. And that exploration will build creativity and influence your abilities to absorb the much more complex approaches to improvisation that are out there, especially in jazz. So this can build your confidence. You can remove all the stigma associated with right and wrong and good and bad when playing this music, especially if you're all taking it seriously. That completely makes it so much more fun to play. And it's going to improve your awareness dramatically. The way you listen to other players. I think it also will improve the way you talk to people, the way you listen to people when they talk about how they feel about things and what they think. So again, this makes the more complex learning approaches easier when you feel like you have some creative vocabulary. So many times as a teacher, I ask a student to just play something, and they start paging through their book to find something to play. I'm like, no, just play. I just want to hear you play something. Well, I don't know what to play. Let's fix that with something like these exercises. Again, I'm Adam Donohue at Lindenwood. As you can see, there's my contact information. If you've got any questions about any of this, or you want that template by Alan Chase, I'm happy to send that on to you, or any of these other resources about this kind of stuff. I'd be happy to share those with you too. Like I said, send me an email. Call me. The link down here, the Rebrandly Lindenwood Music link, is our YouTube page. And on that page, you can see a lot of the free music I do with my group here, the student group called Endeavour. And over the years, the different instrumentations, and we've made a lot of interesting free music using some of these sorts of approaches. So if you're kind of interested in where to start there, that might be cool. But again, if you're interested in finding, like, can I find some more examples of this music to listen to, send me an email, and I'd be happy to chat with you about it. So thanks again.